Welcome to the Combat Intelligent Athlete Show, where we talk and punch our way through achieving peak performance on the mat, surviving the streets, and how to take on the martial arts of everyday life and win. And now, here is your host, Coach Rodney King.
Dr. Belisa Vranich, can you hear me?
Coach King, how are you?
Good, and you? I was actually going to call you the breath whisperer. How does that sound?
I like that.
You like that?
I like that.
I saw at one point you actually were on Caesar Milan's show. I don't know. I didn't watch that episode. Maybe you could tell me why you were on the show.
Sure. Well, we had a woman who was very anxious, and she had a dog she had gotten from her boyfriend who had come back from Afghanistan and brought this dog, who was a bit of a loose cannon, and she was very anxious around him. So her anxiety was adding to his loose cannonness, and my job was to calm her down, and Caesar's job was to train the dog, and we did a pretty good job. I got her to calm down. We actually took her to a firing range, so we put her in a place where she would be anxious or very alert, and taught her to calm down around the dog. So it was a blast. It was a lot of fun. No pun intended. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
So you've written a book called Breathe, and it's brilliant. I mean, I loved it.
Thank you.
I'm not all the way through it, I'll be honest, but really enjoying it. So I thought, just before we get started, maybe you can just give everybody a little bit of a background on yourself, because you've had a fantastic career as well. You've done a lot of different things.
I've definitely done a lot. I have no clean laundry and no children, but I have definitely done a lot related to psychology and to breathing. The breathing I got into because I was a psychologist, and I guess I still am a psychologist. I'm just not practicing as a psychologist. But I had a lot of patients with all different types of disorders, be it generalized anxiety or panic attacks, depression, PTSD. But I came to a point where I was looking for more things for them to do. I was a very interactive psychologist. I gave a lot of homework. I gave a lot of tools, and I expected people to do work between sessions. There was one year where I had to deal with my own stress. I was grinding my teeth. So I don't know if you're a grinder as well, but I was grinding my teeth, and I had to figure out why I was doing it and what the stress in my life was, and get rid of it. So as I was figuring that out, I was also looking for things to calm me down, yoga and running, things like that. I loved the breathing that we did in yoga, and I wanted to learn more about breathing in sports. And anybody else who had done, who had looked at breathing in a sort of systematic way. And that's how I started putting together my method, my system, which is based on getting a grade that looks at how much your diaphragm moves and your style of breathing, and then makes you work out your breathing muscles from there. So that's the kind of short of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's fantastic. I think it's it's underappreciated. I think we just kind of just take for granted, right, that we breathe, but we don't really look at it in an objective kind of way, and kind of, I guess, reflect on how that affects every aspect of our life. I mean, I'm obviously always coming from it from a martial arts standpoint, because I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, of course, and I do other things, and it's so evident that breathing is so important to your performance. Not just on the scale of just, helping you manage your anxiety levels a whole lot better, but just being able to get through, a 5-minute round, for example. I mean, you can, if you don't monitor your breathing, if you're not in tune with your breath, you can really, kill yourself out in like a couple of seconds flat. I mean, you could literally just run out of steam, even though, physically you might be actually fit.
Exactly. And I mean, that was one of the things that was most fascinating to me, is how does it change your endurance and conditioning if you are already doing really well, or if you're really training hard at, not gassing. And the fact is that cardio is incredibly important, but that's just how strong your heart is in getting the blood around your body. How about how oxygenated you are and how your neurological system is responding to your breath? So are you gassing because before you've started to fight, you've actually had so much nervous tension that you've burned yourself out? Are you gassing because you don't know how to replenish when you get in your corner? That sort of nuance was the thing that was really important and really, really interesting to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think, I'm just thinking there, I mean, I did an episode when I first started this podcast, actually on breath. By no means and stretch of imagination do I claim to be an expert, but it was just my own experience with it. And, one of the things that I came across was this whole idea, of course, of the autonomic nervous system. And you've got those, if we simplify, you've got those two aspects to it, right? You've got the sympathetic nervous system, the part that gets you ready for the fight and flight response, so to speak. So when you're actually gearing up for an experience, be it like a match or you sparring, that's where that sympathetic nervous system kicks in. And then you've got the other side of that, right, which is the parasympathetic nervous system, which is your calming side of your autonomic nervous system, the part that gets you back to homeostasis. And the thing that I kind of read and what really stood out for me was that you don't actually have any real conscious control over that autonomic nervous system. But the one thing that you can do to affect it is through your breathing.
Exactly, is that you can think about it and you can tell yourself mantras and you can try to convince yourself, but that's all intellectual. What are you doing so that your nervous system actually is calming down, so that your heart rate is slowing, your blood pressure is going down, your cortisol is going down, and that the only way you can do that is through your breath. And then what you tell yourself once you've calmed yourself down is actually going to stick. But too many people go to the intellectual part of trying to talk themselves down when they're breathing in a way that's telling their nervous system, I'm still in fight and flight.
Yeah. So my the next question is, I guess, just if you are kind of in that experience where you feel that sympathetic nervous system kind of just really just, start ramping up. And I guess there's signs that you can recognize, be it the dry mouth, clammy hands. Obviously, you feel your heart rate increase. You feel the butterflies and so forth. And so you feel that happening. And then, of course, that's going to immediately affect the way that you breathe. And if you want to invoke that parasympathetic nervous system through your breathing, what would you say is a good approach to that? Because there's different kind of ideas on this, and I'd like to kind of get your take on it.
Sure. Well, the fact is that if you're not looking at the style of your breathing, everything else is secondary. So if you're not using your diaphragm, if you're not expanding and contracting where the biggest part of your lungs are, everything else might work depending on what you're using, but it's not going to work as well. The most important thing is, where are you breathing from, and what is that telling your neurological system? So your vagus nerve, and this is a nerve that starts at the top of your head, and vagus means wanderer in Latin, and it does. It's a nerve that starts on the top of your head. It goes throughout your whole body, sort of down like an octopus, and it looks to see where you're breathing from. And when you're breathing at the top of your body, sort of that puffed up chest, shoulders moving a little bit, it automatically puts you into fight and flight. So you can be telling yourself the most calming things and, I don't know, have your good luck whatever with you or your lavender candles. But if you're still breathing through the top of your body, your brain and your nervous system is still going to be in fight or flight. Now, when you switch that breath and make it be a breath that's low in your body, and low, I mean pretty much from your nipples to your hips, is that breath is automatically going to calm your nervous system. So it's funny, you can be breathing with that lower body horizontal breath, and even if your brain is freaking out and telling you things aren't okay, you're still going to have your nervous system and your body be fairly all right and be able to perform and be able to think more clearly. So it's that lower body breath that tells the vagus nerve that it should be alert but calm is what you want.
So I know that you've worked with martial artists before as well, and this is something that I saw like way back when I first started doing Western boxing. I was probably in my young teens and started doing boxing, and it wouldn't be uncommon in the training environment to see people kind of work in the bag or going into sparring or whatever they were doing in training, but kind of do those like really short breaths. You know what I mean? Where it's kind of that kind of motion. But I mean, that's actually not the way to go, right? I mean, that's actually probably the worst possible thing you can do. But it's kind of weird because you could go into, MMA gyms and boxing gyms and so forth, and you will see that style, if we can call it, of breathing kind of always perpetuated. It always seems to be something that tends to be coached, and I think obviously, and you can talk more about that, but that's probably a really bad thing to do, especially, for example, if your sympathetic nervous system is kicking off into high gear.
Well, you know what? People always ask, how should I breathe when I'm fighting, when I'm in the thick of things, whether it's things are blowing up around me or it's hand to hand, I'm in the pocket. And that is like, you should just be going by your own intuition, your own, very astute athletic intuition at that point. You should not be thinking about how am I breathing at the moment that you're, very close to your opponent and you're fighting for your life or for the sport, whatever you're fighting for. So in that moment, you should really be going on your instinct that's been cultivated by your talent and the study of mechanics and so on and so forth. It's the moment that you pull away from your opponent and you're jogging on the outside a little bit. That's when you should be doing good breathing. It's the moment that you're in your corner that you should definitely be taking an anatomically congruous, efficient breath. And then outside the ring between competition and then just walking around day to day. So there's all sorts of levels as an athlete where you need to be thinking of your breathing. And in each situation, it's different. Now, when you're striking and you're talking about that everybody, when they hit, they sort of exhale a little bit and they make that little exhale noise. That, when you strike to exhale, is good. You should be striking on the exhale. Although you should be able to strike on both the inhale and the exhale if you need to, because life isn't always going to let you strike on the exhale. But striking or doing whatever takes effort on the exhale is good. Now, also, if you're boxing and you're up close on your opponent, you're not going to exhale to be completely empty, because the last thing you want to be is completely narrow and completely out of air. You're going to go to brace in case you get hit. So what happens when you're face-to-face with your opponent is going to be a little bit different than if you're a few steps away from him or her and jogging around them. If you're jogging around them, if you're away from them a little bit and you can think about your breathing, or especially when you're in your corner, you should be taking big expansive breaths, lower part of your body, and you should be emptying all the way out. So when you're in your corner is really the most important place to focus on your breathing, because that's where you're going to catch your breath. That's where you're going to center yourself. That's when you're going to really find your breath again and get reoxygenated so you can go back into the fight.
Yeah, absolutely. My experience with it is similar to that, right? So I would agree with everything you've said. I think what I found is that oftentimes is that what people tend to do is when they make those little kind of short breaths, they don't ever get to that point where they're really oxygenating themselves, even at a distance. The one thing that I noted was that when people kind of make those short breaths, especially if they're feeling anxious already, it obviously, in my experience and what I've seen, is that it tends to heighten that anxiety.
Yes, and actually think about how women birthing will make those. They were told to do those same little breaths. It's the stupidest thing ever, is that when you're, giving birth, is the last thing you should be taking is short, shallow breaths. It's the last thing. It actually can heighten your anxiety. So there's moments, those short little breaths are not going to be good for you. You're absolutely right.
So what is the other side of this as well? Because I guess maybe this is a bit divergent, but I guess the one thing that I come to this, this kind of idea of breathing as well, is that breath also tethers you to the present moment. And I know that you've spent a lot of time doing yoga, so maybe you can speak a little bit to that as well. I mean, it's the one side of it, of course, is that, of course, breathing effectively is going to enhance your performance. But I think the other, if we can call it, side effect of proper breathing is that it keeps you more present. And that's definitely a good place to be in the heat of the moment, so to speak, especially if we're talking about fighting in general.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the worst thing that can happen is that you start mulling about the past or about something you did wrong a few seconds ago or a few minutes ago, or you start worrying about the future. You want to stay firmly planted in the present, and the only way to do that is through your breath. And nowadays, most people spend so little time in the present. I mean, it's either when you're sneezing or orgasming is when you're in the present, and all the rest of the time you're completely somewhere else, usually, on some app or on your handheld. So yes, the breath is the number one thing that's going to keep you in the present, which is going to make sure that you are paying attention to everything that's going around with you, and also being able to hear your intuition, which for everybody is important, but for a fighter is terrifically important because you're looking to see what the other person is doing. And if there's too many things in your mind, you're not going to be able to pick up the signals of what's going on with your opponent.
For sure. And one of the drills that I do with my students sometimes, which is, it's always kind of fascinates them, and I say to them, okay, well, what I want you to do right now is take an in breath, and then you're going to exhale, but I want you to exhale so you can actually hear it. So that's important. You must be able to hear it. But while you exhale, I want you to try to think of something. And typically what the response will be, wow, that's amazing. When I was exhaling and obviously I could hear that breath, so I'm focused on that exhale. I couldn't actually think of anything else except the exhale. Only the exhale was actually happening.
I love that. That's great. And you're right, is that when having the auditory cue of your breath helps you focus on it more, which is why sometimes I'll tell people to breathe through their mouth when they're getting used to, paying attention to the breath. Although you should breathe through your nose, as often as you can, especially at night. The breathing through your mouth helps you pay attention to it, not only because of the sensation on your lips, but because you can hear it, and thus you have to pay more attention. So that's awesome. I like that.
Yeah, because I do that all the time when I'm working with somebody that is struggling with anxiety, and that's quite common, especially in the beginning when you start introducing somebody to contact per se. They're going to be a little bit anxious. They're going to feel that adrenaline rush, so to speak. And the first thing that I notice is they start holding their breath. They're not even aware that that's happening. And so one of the ways that I found to get around that is to get them just focused on actually hearing that breath, hearing that out breath, as a way to almost remind themselves to keep breathing.
Exactly. And that you focus on the exhale is so important, because most people will hold their breath on the inhale. Very few people will hold on the exhale. So you buy them a couple seconds, until they hold their breath again, but at least you buy them another breath or another couple seconds. So that's excellent. I actually have a t-shirt that says exhale across the front in really huge letters, and then breathing for warriors on the back. But I talk about the importance of the exhale all the time, because it's sort of the underdog in breathing, but it's so important.
So another thing we could talk about as well is that I know that you've got a certification program. So if people actually want to learn more about this, and I think it's very important. I mean, there's no way that one podcast could do it justice. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your certification program, because that sounds really interesting, and it's definitely something that I think people should look into.
Oh, thank you. The certification takes my method and breaks it down so that you can see clients and look at their breathing and know what's wrong, and then know how to intervene and give them exercises. It's a very straightforward, very fast, intensive certification. There are CE credits attached to it, and it spans it touches on everything from COPD and emphysema to panic attacks, to just everything that has to do with breathing, whether it is related to mental health or performance or lung capacity and disease. So it's something I've been doing for the last year, and it's super intense. The last one was just a few weeks ago in New York, and we had students from Berlin, Moscow, Bosnia, Canada, all over the place, and really just sophisticated, interesting people that want to be able to do what they do, but add the breathing and have an edge as far as what they teach. So it's really fascinating to me as to be able to teach now and be able to have a group of people. I can teach them my system, and it works for them. So it's a fun class. And like I said, where I came from is really combining breathing that came in martial art, breathing from martial arts, singing, diving, yoga, birthing. So it was everywhere I could find breathing, and including trance breathing, some trance controlled hyperventilation that's gotten popular now, but also very, very practical of, what muscles are you using? Are you really using your diaphragm? Are you really? is your exhale really efficient, and so on and so forth. But I do love teaching, and I'm getting some really nice reviews, so that makes me happy.
What would you say that's the kind of the mindset is changing? I mean, if if you're talking about people coming in from all over the world to, learn from you and learn how to breathe more effectively. I mean, would you say that's changing, or because what is that kind of turning point? I mean, if I think about it, I mean, we're talking about it now. I understand how important it really is. I've written about it. I've talked about it. I've presented it when I teach around the world. But if I go back just even 5 years ago, I don't think it would have even been a topic that kind of came up in conversation.
You're absolutely right. And it was actually about 5 years ago when I really started making the transition to teach. And I would say I taught breathing. It was interesting the response I would get. It was really, sort of like, oh, I've got that. There's a lot of things I need help with, but that's pretty natural. I just breathe naturally. Or I'd have people say, oh, I do yoga, which means nothing because folks who do yoga breathe just as badly as anybody else does. So now it's really interesting. Now I actually, if I'm on an airplane and don't want to talk to the person next to me, I actually don't tell them I do breathing because people are very interested. They're almost, there's so much news about it. They're obsessed. They really want more information. And, back to the breathing when you strike or when you're punching, that's a question that comes up all the time. And it's because people have heard it both in birthing, but also I think that in martial arts, they've seen, Hickson do the 3 little puffs of air to sort of start himself over again. And in Systema as well, they use the puffs of air for to help with pain. So people are often asking about the puffs of air and what they do. So it's the interest now is so much bigger than it used to be, and really it's such a pleasure right now to always go to news sources and see, oh, well, look, there's an article about Hillary Clinton doing alternate nostril breathing. There's an article about Jason Duffner, the golfer, and his doing breathing for his putt, so on and so forth. It's really quite fascinating and such a pleasure lately.
I was wondering how much of this the whole mindfulness revolution aided in this as well, because definitely that's come to the forefront over the last 5 years. And one of the things we were just talking about earlier was this whole idea of how breath tethers you to the present moment, and maybe mindfulness and this whole kind of bringing it to the forefront and I guess making it a word that everybody now typically has heard or is starting to understand, also now brings the breath to the forefront.
Oh, and Rodney, it's funny because people use the word mindful, but I want you to try this, is ask folks what they think mindfulness is. It's interesting. It's become one of those words that people use a lot, but they actually don't have a clear idea of what it is. And I'll giggle sometimes and I'll say mindfulness is just not texting. If you're not texting, you're actually paying attention somewhat to your surroundings. And that's what mindfulness, the bare minimum of what mindfulness is not texting. But now the breath, when you add the breath to it, breathing and paying attention to your breath is meditating. It is a sort of meditation. And for people that can't do sort of traditional TM meditation or feeling really frustrated that they can't quiet their minds, focusing on the breath, even if it's for a couple seconds, is the beginning of what being mindful and meditating is. You're spot on.
Yeah, and the Buddha talked about this, and he was very clear that, one of the major doorways into being mindful was through the body. And so that obviously then that part of it is this aspect of focusing on your breath.
The inhale and the exhale. And again, like you said, hearing it, having it be audible, whether you're doing an ujjayi breath or you're just simply opening your mouth and hearing it, through your ears on the outside of your head and sort of the inside of your body, hearing your breath is tremendously important. Yeah.
So would you say that's if somebody's listening to this and they're going, okay, that sounds fantastic. Obviously, more than likely they're going to go out and get your book. Hopefully they decide to do the certification process. But if that's not available to them right now, we kind of hinted on this, I guess, through the discussion, but what would you say is a good starting point for them? Where would they start? And maybe just a couple of steps kind of moving forward.
Sure. Well, what you have to do I mean, human beings are complex. You can't just tell them to do something. Most of the time, if it doesn't make sense to us, we're not going to do it. So if you tell someone take a belly breath, they're not going to do it for very long, if at all, because A, it doesn't look cute. It looks unattractive because we think, oh, it's going to make us gassy. We're breathing into our belly. So coming to an understanding of your anatomy is really important. And most of us, funny enough, don't really know our anatomy well. I mean, there's so many things, that we know incredible details about, but when it comes to our own bodies, we don't. And the diaphragm is one of the most misunderstood muscles in our body, even though it's possibly, I think it's the second most important, maybe the first most important muscle in your body. And it's huge, but we can't see it. We can't feel it. So we don't pay attention to it. So for me, if you had to take one thing away, it's that you need to use your diaphragm to breathe. Your diaphragm is a skirt steak. I don't know if you guys say skirt steak, but it's a very muscular slab of muscle that's shaped kind of like a frisbee, and it's in the very middle of your body. And most of us don't use it at all. And this is insane that we would have this beautiful, strong muscle right below our hearts and our lungs and right above our intestines, and that we don't use it at all it's a crime. So just understanding that the way you breathe has to use your diaphragm. You have to let your diaphragm work. Most of us breathe using our shoulders. We puff up the top of our chest and we use all the auxiliary muscles that have to do with breathing because culturally, inhaling and expanding your middle doesn't look good. And if you're bracing because of fear or anxiety, it doesn't feel good either. It makes you feel vulnerable. But you have to break those things down in order to take a good breath that's actually going to be better for you long term. So if you put your hands on your body, in the front of your body, at the bottom of your front rib, so somewhere between your nipples and your belly button, and you inhale and you expand right underneath your hands, and then when you exhale, you squeeze your own body and even use your fingers to squeeze your belly into your body. That's a good inhale and exhale. And I know that sounds super simple, but most of us aren't breathing this way, although our body really wants to breathe this way. So you can try this right now, where your hands are on your belly, you inhale, push your belly into your hands, or if you already have a belly, you just release it into your hands. You might tip forwards a little bit because having that hip movement really helps. And on the exhale, take your fingers, stick them in your belly, and squeeze your body to narrow it and get all that air out, pushing your back against perhaps the back of the chair, rolling your hips under. So if you do that where you tip forward, let your belly go and make a big belly, and then on the exhale, squeeze and narrow your body, that's actually a perfect breath. And each breath you take like this is worth 6 of the ones you were taking before. So think about how wonderful that is as far as how well you're oxygenating. And when you're breathing this way, which is starting to get your diaphragm involved, that letting your belly go is actually just telling your diaphragm that's right above it that it's okay to expand your body on the inhale and narrow it on the exhale. So that has just a whole bunch of wonderful things that happen when you start breathing that way. Number one is that you calm down. You feel like you get a little bit high. Your back starts being protected and decompressing from being braced all the time. Your digestion gets supported. Your energy gets boosted, and eventually, if you do this enough during the day, it actually helps you go to sleep at night.
So what's interesting that you were saying that you were talking about the back kind of relaxing, through that breath. One of the things that happened to me about 4 weeks ago is I basically had 2 bulge discs, which just flared up overnight. I was on the mat. I didn't really think much about it. I thought it was only a muscle spasm, but literally by the next day, I knew there was a real problem. And so, long story short, 2 bulge discs impinging on a nerve. I still kind of have. I'm up and I'm around and I'm walking, but I've got that residual after effect where the back of my hand, my right hand is numb. My 2 of my fingers are slightly still numb, moving into my forearm. But one of the things that I've been doing over the last 4 weeks is I've been spending a considerable amount of time really focusing on what you've been describing as far as the breath. And so one that's really helped, I feel, my recovery because it's allowed almost that kind of tension in my back to release. But at the same time, it's definitely helped with pain, which is really interesting. You wouldn't think that the focus on the breath would also aid you in managing your pain better.
You know what? If you look back, most people won't think about pain and about their back pain and breath. But if you look at the way Systema breathes and the way they teach breathing and pain, and you look at birthing and pain, the exhale is meant to distract you from the pain. So often the breath is used as a way to distract someone from focusing on the pain and actually making it worse. The physiological component, which is what you're asking about, is that if you're in a loop of pain, the only thing that can get you out is, probably a pain pill that's terrifically, can be expensive and addictive, but the breath can get you out of that loop of pain. And there's plenty of literature that shows that back pain makes for shallow breathing, which makes for more back pain, which makes for more shallow breathing. So it's exactly the breath that can get you out of that loop. Besides that, we know that if you inhale, you can actually get your spine to decompress a little bit. And most of us walk around very compressed. We're upright when we shouldn't be upright all the time. We do things that compress our spine, whether it be things at the gym or things at work. So our spines, there are bulging discs and degenerative diseases with discs that we could avoid by inhaling and really focusing on lengthening the spine, not in a woo-woo kind of way where you just imagine your spine decompressing, is that when you inhale and actually stretch, inhale and exhale and actually move your spine, and where you make sure that the muscles around the place where you have the injury are not so tight that they're adding to the pain as well, which is actually not mine at all. It's John Sarno, someone I like very much, who talks about back pain, emotions, and breathing.
Yeah, so what I found was that going into a child's pose, which I think you obviously would be familiar with coming from a yoga background, and just spending time in that position and then focusing on my breath and doing, as you were saying, really you're making sure that I'm breathing down and into my belly and not just, peripherally up on my shoulder area, that made a massive difference.
And with that one, what I'm going to ask you to try, which might work for you, and again, everybody's different. Everybody's spine and injuries and personality is different. So if you have back pain, you can try this. And Rodney, I want you to try this, is that when you're in child's pose, rather than having your legs open and having your belly between your legs, I'm going to ask you to put your legs together so that your belly is on your legs. In child's pose, for those of you that don't know, is sort of the turtle pose that kids do in school, where you're on your legs on the ground and you're sort of in this turtle-like position. And if you lie down so that your belly is on your legs, you can't breathe forwards. So don't let yourself breathe forwards because your belly and your legs will be too close together. So I actually want you to relax your shoulders onto the ground, relax your head and neck, inhale, and try to open up your back. So try to almost puff up your back on the inhale and see if you can lengthen and puff up your back, which really stretches your back open. And then you exhale and just relax. So try the child's pose, but with knees together, belly on your legs, so with that when you inhale, you're curving forwards and actually creating space in your back. That one might feel really good as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And where would you say you should put your hands?
Hands are in back of you. And the reason I want them in back of you, and thank you for asking that, is that it allows your shoulders to really sort of melt over and get heavy, and that your breath not be moving forwards and back, but rather that your back puffs up and then it flattens out. It puffs up and flattens out. If you have your hands in front of you, which is sort of the more traditional pose, you're not allowed to have the same sort of down feeling that you do if your hands are in back of you. And your thumbs are almost turned up towards the ceiling. But really, you should relax your arms and your shoulders so they feel really heavy, and have your neck and your head be in a really comfortable position, and just puff up your back when you inhale, and you'll almost feel your butt and your tailbone curled down and under you. So your goal is to almost dome your back as much as possible. You can also do this sitting on a chair where you lean over your legs and breathe so that you're puffing up your chest. Now, if you breathe forwards, you're going to feel sort of like you're stacked or neon, where there's just not enough space for you to breathe, and there isn't. Your belly's on your knees. So this is why when I work with martial artists, it's so much fun, because you learn how to breathe through different parts of your body, so that if you're ever in a position where you're feeling suffocated, you at least know that you can expand and breathe laterally. You can breathe through your back. You can breathe through the top of your lungs. You can breathe through the bottom of them. So leaning over your legs and letting your arms dangle, your head dangle especially, and just puffing up your back on the inhale is really going to help your spine decompress.
Well, I'm definitely going to give it a try. Absolutely. I'll let you know how it turns out.
Thank you. Please, I want to know.
So I guess one of the things, of course, just with all the things we're talking about, which is very clear to me, is that one of the things that somebody's going to have to do if they take this seriously, they're going to have to put the time in, right? They're going to have to practice. And so, would you say that if we talk in the sense of martial arts, where would be a good time to practice this? Would it be better to practice this off the mat, so to speak, or try to invoke that practice when you actually either, live rolling or sparring? Or would that not be a good time to practice now?
So you need to start off the mat. You need to start it as part of your training before and after you roll. So it has to be separate. And then you can bring it in when you're taking breaks, or when you've moved to the side of the mat and you're just recovering. But I would not, don't go, too many people try to jump in and go, well, I'm going to use this, when I'm sparring, when I'm fighting. No, you have to fix it from the bottom up, which means that your breathing during the day has to get better at the side of the ring, outside of the ring, and then at this, at the outside the ring and inside at the corner has to get better before you bring it into your game. Because really it's how you're breathing every single day and how you're recovering that's so important. And I talk a lot about recovery, and I talk a lot about injury and breathing, because those are the two times that breathing could be the most important for you. We don't recover well. And if you don't recover well, you're going to burn out and you're going to get injured. And recovery for most people just means that you're not training, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're resting. You're playing video games, you're doing laundry, you're on the computer. You're not really resting your body. And so setting up a routine so that your recovery day really is a recovery day has to include a breathing practice and a meditation practice if you do that, or if you want that. Now, with injury, what's super cool about the breathing is that it gives you something to do while you're healing that helps boost your healing and helps keep your endorphins high so that you don't get depressed. And this feeling. When you get injured, the probability of getting dysthymic, having a low depression or a severe depression, because on top of the pain, you can't do the exercise that usually makes you happy, it's a real threat for a lot of athletes.
For sure. I can speak to that myself. Just the last 4 weeks have been, the first 2 weeks was more about just trying to manage and deal with the pain. And then as I felt, as I started to feel better pain-wise, I started to feel, a little bit depressed. Not that I wanted to jump off a building, but just more depressed with the fact that I couldn't actually do what I wanted to do. I'm now, you start to realize this is going to take a long time to get to that point. This is a slow process, especially when you're dealing with two bulged discs and an impinged nerve. You're looking at least a minimum of several weeks before you could even say, that you can, mildly recovered. And then there's still that kind of long-term now effect of that, where you start coming back into training, but now you're so aware that you were injured. And, you kind of have that in the back of your mind that you're now scared to take, any kind of move or make a move in case you back to square one again.
And actually your breathing gets affected by that, because the fear of re-injuring is something that's very real. And very possible, unfortunately. So you do have to take care of that spot. But many people, when they come back after an injury, they guard their bodies and they try to protect them. And what happens in that moment is that they take smaller breaths, because big breaths feel vulnerable and because they may hurt. So often when you're in that recovery but slightly scared mode, your breathing can get very dysfunctional as well.
I was also thinking this other when you were talking, and just this idea of practice as well, was that taking it off the mat, practicing there, and then bringing it onto the mat. But what I found oftentimes, especially in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I know you're aware of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, when you get caught up in certain positions, let's say somebody takes a side control on you, it feels stifling. A lot of people kind of start panicking there. So even though a person might know that they should be breathing properly and be focusing on that breath, in that moment in time, it's almost like they forget everything. And what I've realized is that one of the ways to kind of get around that is I use those stability balls, those big balls. And then rather than having somebody kind of take you into a side control position and then you go into this panic state and you forget that you're supposed to be breathing, I use the stability ball on you instead. So there's kind of this buffer between myself and you on the floor. And so what happens now, because you're not now immediately panicking that this other human being is right on top of you, then making you claustrophobic, the ball separates us out. And so because there's that separation of the ball, people tend to find it a little bit easier to now, refocus on the breath.
And that whole concept of practicing adversity is one that I love. And when I first started teaching warrior classes, we would do dog piles because you have to practice situations that you're going to be in. Too often, not for fighters, but your average person, is they figure when I get into that situation, I'll be fine, or I'll just default to a good choice. And the fact is that you have to practice being uncomfortable, you have to practice adversity, you have to practice being in pain, so that when you get there, it's not new and it's not something you have to panic about.
And what I've also noticed is that, when you really focusing on this idea of proper breathing and putting that into play in a martial arts setting, typically what you find is that people come back to you as they really start developing that skill, because I think it is a skill. Like you said, we take breathing for granted. We don't even think about actually practicing our breath. But once you actually start going down the road of practice, you start to realize, hold on a second, this doesn't just only help me in my martial arts game, but this is positively showing up in my everyday life as well.
Oh, sure. I mean, if it's about not having an adrenaline dump, and other points of your life and your job, if it's about not being nervous when you're going into a meeting or on a date, if it's about taking care of your digestive system because you have acid reflux or sleeping better, because all those things change dramatically when you change your breathing, it just ripples throughout your entire life. And that's something that I was surprised, because when I started teaching breathing, it was specifically for anxiety and depression. And then I realized that a few things. Number one is that your endurance got better because your breathing muscles got stronger, especially if you push them hard, which is the classes I love teaching. But also, I'd have people come back and say, my digestion is better. I used to be so constipated. I used to have so much acid reflux. Like, why is that happening? Or my back pain is better. Or I slept for the first time and I don't know how long. So that's something I had to study, because, I was getting people coming back with things that were working out and feeling better that I never expected.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So if somebody wanted to get your book, Breathe, where would be the best place to get it?
You can order it online. You can get it on Audible. So if you go to my website and go to the book, or just Google it, there's the Auditory version, and then there's the one in print. And then I write a lot. I do podcasts because this is information that even if you can't get the book, you should be able to have a hold of. So it's not a secret that you can't have. Obviously, I've told you the main parts of things just today, in that you need to breathe using your diaphragm. You need to understand your diaphragm. So if you want more information, definitely order the book. It's a book I'm terrifically proud of. And if you don't mind, one of the things about the book that I really love is that I dedicated it to liamslife.org, which is an organization that my friend Marcus and Michelle Kowal set up, and to fight drunk driving and to encourage organ donation after the loss of their 15-month-old baby Liam. And if you don't know Marcus, he is an amazing fighter and athlete, and the organization is doing some wonderful, wonderful work, and that's who the book is dedicated to.
Oh, yeah, that's amazing. Maybe we can get him on the show at some point.
he's a great guy, and he's doing this whole kicking 100 kicks to raise awareness, and he's been doing it for a year, every single day for a year, and just joined people, on this cause from all over the world and done amazing things. And he's an incredible, incredible martial artist. So just an amazing person. And that's my cause. And all the people that go through my training, they pick this up as their cause as well, because it's something that needs to change. And we need to have more awareness around those two causes, both stopping people from driving drunk, because his baby was run over by a 72-year-old woman at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So it was not a drunk teenager. It's not the idea that we have of a drunk teenager out on a Saturday night. Although that happens a lot as well. It was an older woman in the middle of the day in Los Angeles, but also about organ donation, because he and his wife decided to have Liam's organs, the ones that were not obviously crushed and the ones that were okay to be able to give to other people. He gave those organs to other people who now can live because of him.
Well, that's a powerful story. Your web address, so people can find
the
you.
breathing class. It's plain and simple. I'm just not fancy. So it's the breathing class, and Twitter and Instagram is Dr. Belisa, DRBELISA. And that's all I got. And the book is called Breathe. So.
Yeah, no, great book. Well, I really appreciated talking to you. I don't want to take any more of your time.
Rodney, thank you so much. An honor and a privilege.
No, absolutely. And, I'm going to put this out, and I know people are going to get a lot out of it. And I'd love to do it again when you have some more time.
Anytime. You just name the date. I'm here for you.
To find out more about our sponsor, Crazy Monkey, go to crazymonkeydefense.com, or to become a trainer, check out mastercrazymonkey.com. Until the next show, get out there and right hook life.